Alright, in this section we're going to cover phase shift of sine and cosine function. Now, my definition is phase shift is equal to c over the absolute value of b. Now, have you taken notes from the textbook? It says that phase shift is equal to the negative c over the absolute value of b. So let me explain that. Now, in the previous examples that we've done together, in the previous videos that I have done, I said to get the opposite sign of c. So, if you get the opposite sign, then you follow this definition, just c over absolute value of b. Now, you'll see later on why we get the opposite value, the opposite sign of c, so that it ties into transformations. Up, down, left, right, vertical, horizontal, dilation, stretch or compress, and then reflected across the x-axis and reflected across the y-axis. The c value, once we get the c value, then that's going to play into where it's going to move either left or right. Now, the textbook phase shift is equal to negative c over the absolute value of b. Now, when you're gathering your A, B, C, D, if you did not change the sign of your c, so in this case, negative pi over 3. If you write out that c is equal to negative pi over 3, then you use this one right here. If you did it the way how I shown you, which was always pull out the opposite of your c. So, first I'm going to write out the A, B, C, D. So A is 1/2, B is negative 3, C, now as I did before, since it's minus pi over 3, I'm just going to write it as a positive pi over 3, and then D is negative 1. Alright, so as I was saying before, I took the opposite of C, so therefore I'm going to use C over absolute value of B. Now if I did not, then I must use this one. Now, your question is, what's the point of this? Well, again, the way how I'm doing this will play into transformation. But the signs, positive and negative, does play a factor of getting the correct value for phase shift. So, I'll show you the method, the work here, if you did not change the sign of C. But I'm doing this because later on we're going to do transformation. So phase shift is C, so it's going to be pi over 3 over the absolute value of B, so negative 3 inside the absolute value. Alright, so I'm going to write it right here. Since I'm running out of space, I want to save this space right here, this room for this work. Alright, so when we do the absolute value of negative 3, it will be pi over 3 over positive 3. Alright, so I have a fraction within the whole fraction. So I'm going to rewrite it as a division. So pi over 3 divided by 3. Now when I convert this into a multiplication, I need to change the 3 into a fraction. Rewrite it as pi over 3 times, flip the second fraction, so 1 over 3. So pi over 3 times 1/3, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, when we're multiplying with fraction. So it's going to be pi as the numerator and 9 as our denominator. So our phase shift is pi over 9. Alright, so here, say that when I'm pulling out the C value, I did not change the sign. So therefore, C is negative pi over 3. So I'm going to use this formula. I'm going to plug in the C value, but I'm also plugging in the same B value. So our phase shift will be negative, a bit more down. So negative of negative pi over 3 over the absolute value of B. So the absolute value of negative 3. Alright, so what happened here, since we have a negative with another negative, when that happens, that becomes positive, so it's going to be pi over 3 over the absolute value of negative 3, which when we simplify it will be pi over 3 over another 3. So it's basically the same as what we had before. And then when we simplify, you should get the same answer as this, pi over 9. So this right here, if you pull out the exact same C value, so since it's minus pi over 3 and you write it as C equals negative pi over 3, and when you plug it in, the negative from the textbook formula, what happens here when they're right next to each other, it becomes positive. So we have pi over 3 over the absolute value of negative 3. Simplify the absolute value, so it's now pi over 3 over 3, which is the same as this. And then when I work this out, I got pi over 9. So either way, you should end up with the same answer. So my method that I did before in the previous video, what y'all have done, you use the opposite for C, you use this formula. If you do not, then you use this formula. But again, you will see how this C value will play into transformation. In our second example, we have the same problem. Y equals sine of 4 theta minus 5 pi over 6 plus 1. So A, B, C, D. A is 1, B is 4, C minus 5 pi over 6 will be just simply 5 pi over 6, and then D is 1. Alright, so phase shift. Is equal to the C over absolute value of B. So my C is 5 pi over 6 over the absolute value of B, which is 4. And I'm going to move all the way over here. So 5 pi over 6. Now the absolute value of B, or the absolute value of 4, is just simply 4. So now we have a fraction within the whole fraction. We're going to rewrite it as a division, so the numerator comes first. So 5 pi over 6 divided by 4. Now when I want to convert this to a multiplication, I change the 4 into a fraction because we're going to flip the second fraction. So 5 pi over 6 times, I'm going to flip the second one, so it's going to be 1 over 4. When it's multiplication, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. So it's going to equal to 5 pi in the numerator, and then 6 times 4 is 24 in our denominator. So our phase shift is 5 pi over 24. So that's our phase shift. Now, if, say, you didn't change the sign on our C value, so C is negative 5 pi over 6. So when we plug into this formula, if I get the exact same B value, it's going to be negative of negative 5 pi over 6 over the absolute value of 4. So remember, just like before, when there's a negative next to another negative, it becomes a positive. So is going to be 5 pi over 6 over the absolute value of 4. When you simplify the absolute value of 4, it's just be another 5 pi over 6 over a positive 4. So this right here is just the same as this one right here. And then when you simplify it, you're going to end up with 5 pi over 24. So regardless, you still end up with the same answer. But you must follow one process only. If you use the opposite sign for C, then this rule. If you did not, then that rule. But again, what I'm doing here is going to play into transformation. Alright, in our third example, we have y equals 3 cosine of negative 3 theta over 4 plus pi over 6, then minus 2. So it's just like how we did in frequency. Now I'm not going to rewrite this. I now know how to factor out the fraction from theta. So A, B, C, D. A is negative 3. I'm going to factor out the fraction from theta for B, which is negative 3/4. C is negative pi over 6. And then D is negative 2. Alright. So, phase shift. I'm using this formula because I took the opposite of C from the example. So, the opposite of C, our C value is going to be negative pi over 6 over, now we have a fraction for our B value. So it's going to be the absolute value of negative 3/4. Alright. So when we simplify that, I'm going to write it over here. It's going to be negative pi over 6 over the absolute value of negative 3/4 would be just 3/4. Alright, so now I'm going to rewrite it as a division. So our numerator comes first. So negative pi over 6 times, sorry, I said division, so let me do that first. The denominator, so 3/4. Then I'm going to rewrite it as a multiplication. So it's going to be negative pi over 6 times, flip the second fraction, so 4/3. So fraction times fraction. So I'm going to rewrite it over here. Pi times 4 is just 4 pi. 6 times 3 is 18. But do not forget your negative. Negative. Remember, negative pi over 6 times 4/3 is negative 4 pi over 18. Now, I can still simplify it because negative 4 and 18 are both even numbers. They can be divisible to be divided by 2. So dividing the top by 2, dividing by the bottom by 2. So it's going to be negative 4 pi divided by 2 is 2 pi. 18 divided by 2 is 9. So our phase shift is negative 2 pi over 9. So again, since I took the opposite of C, I use this formula. Now, had you used exactly what you had, which is a positive pi over 6, and you plug it in there, it would have come out negative because of that negative sign. But in here, when I changed it, I used this formula, and it came out negative. So, be very careful what process you use. But again, we're going to be using this process because C will play into transformation. So, to review, we got our B value negative 3/4 and our C value negative pi over 6. Plug it in to this formula. and then did the absolute value of negative 3/4, which is just 3/4. We wrote it as a division, so numerator, negative pi over 6 divided by 3/4. Change it to multiplication and flip the second fraction. When we multiply, we got negative 4 pi over 18. Divide top and bottom by 2, we get negative 2 pi over 9. That's our phase shift.